public, Robert laughed, but there was no humor in it. The public has a right to know who they're idolizing? That's rich coming from someone who has spent the last 10 minutes trying to reduce a human being to the worst chapters of his life. The studio fell noticeably quieter. The audience, which had expected a light-hearted celebrity interview, now watched with growing unease as the exchange became increasingly tense. Joy folded her arms. I'm not reducing you to anything. I'm asking whether people should be skeptical of these carefully crafted redemption stories that Hollywood loves to sell. Robert shook his head slowly. You keep using words like crafted and sold, as if recovery is a marketing strategy. Do you have any idea how many people struggle every day to overcome addiction? Do you know how insulting it is to suggest that personal growth is just some public relations campaign? Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Robert continued. You say you're holding me accountable. Accountable for what? Making mistakes decades ago? I've never hidden from my past. I've talked about it openly because I hoped it might help someone else realize they can change too. The other hosts exchanged nervous glances. Even Whoopi. Goldberg appeared uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Joy leaned forward again. That's a nice speech, Robert. But let's not pretend your story hasn't benefited you professionally. The comeback narrative has become part of your brand. Robert stared at her for a moment before answering. You know what's interesting? Every time someone talks about growth, forgiveness, or redemption, there are always people who insist none of it is real. They'd rather believe people never change because it makes the world simpler. His voice remained calm, but there was unmistakable frustration beneath it. You seem determined to prove that no matter what someone accomplishes, no matter how much they grow, they'll always be defined by their worst mistakes. Joy's expression hardened. No, I'm saying that fame doesn't erase accountability. And I'm saying accountability isn't the same thing as permanent condemnation. Robert shot back. The audience responded with scattered applause. Joy appeared surprised by the reaction but pressed forward. So now you're turning this into a lecture? No, Robert replied. I'm responding to the interview you've chosen to have. For a brief moment, silence settled over the table. Then Robert leaned back in his chair and spoke more softly. You know, I came here today expecting to talk about a film that hundreds of people worked hard to make. I expected to talk about creativity, storytelling, and the work itself. Instead, we've spent most of this conversation dissecting mistakes I made decades ago. He gestured toward the audience. People watch movies because they connect with stories. They connect with characters who fall down and get back up. That's not hypocrisy. That's humanity. Joy's voice softened slightly, though her tone remained skeptical. So you're saying nobody should question you? Not at all, Robert replied. Question me. Question anyone. But do it honestly. Don't walk into a conversation with the conclusion already written. The room grew quiet again. Robert looked around the table before continuing. Because if you've already decided who someone is before they open their mouth, then you're not interviewing them. You're performing a verdict. The words seemed to land heavily across the studio. For the first time since the interview began, Joy didn't immediately respond. The audience watched as an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Robert finally offered a small smile. Look, Joy, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking for the same thing. I'd offer anyone sitting in this chair basic respect. Whoopi nodded subtly. That's fair, she said. The tension eased slightly, though the atmosphere remained charged. Robert turned back toward the audience. People aren't the sum of their worst decisions. If they were, none of us would stand a chance. A wave of applause rolled through the studio, and for a moment, the conversation stopped being about celebrity, controversy, or television ratings. It became a discussion about forgiveness, growth, and whether people should be allowed to become more than the mistakes they once made. Robert went completely still. For a moment, the entire studio seemed frozen. The audience stopped shifting in their seats. The co-host stared at the table. Even Joy appeared to realize she had crossed a line. When Robert finally spoke, his voice was calm, far calmer than anyone expected. Thank you, Joy. The response caught everyone off guard. Joy blinked. Excuse me? Thank you, Robert repeated. Because you just demonstrated exactly what I've been talking about for the last 15 minutes. The silence deepened. You claim you're asking tough questions. But the moment this conversation stopped going the way you wanted, you reached for the lowest blow you could find. Joy folded her arms. I stated a fact. No, Robert replied. You weaponized a fact. He leaned forward slightly. There's a difference. The audience remained silent as he continued. I've spent decades talking openly about those mistakes. I've discussed them in interviews, documentaries, and public appearances. I've never hidden from them. His eyes never left Joy. But you didn't bring them up because you were interested in truth. You brought them up because you wanted to hurt me. Joy's expression hardened. Maybe the truth hurts. Sometimes it does, Robert agreed. But real truth is supposed to illuminate something. It's supposed to help people understand. What you're doing isn't about understanding. He gestured toward the audience. It's about humiliation. Whoopi shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Joy immediately pushed back. Oh, please. You're acting like some kind of victim now. Robert laughed quietly. See, that's exactly what I mean. What does that mean? Joy demanded.
It means every time someone challenges your behavior,
you immediately change the subject. He sat back in his chair. I point out that you're making personal attacks, and suddenly I'm playing the victim. I explain my position, and suddenly I'm being defensive. I disagree with you, and suddenly I can't handle accountability. The audience began applauding softly. Joy looked visibly irritated by the reaction. You know what your problem is? She asked. Robert shrugged. I'm sure you're about to tell me. You think because people like you're beyond criticism. Robert shook his head. No, I think criticism should actually be criticism. He paused. If you wanted to challenge my work, my decisions, my performances, my opinions, that's fair. That's part of being a public figure. His expression grew serious. But attacking my recovery, questioning whether my family is real, suggesting that personal growth is some elaborate performance, he slowly shook his head. That says far more about you than it does about me. The room fell quiet again. Joy looked toward the audience before returning her gaze to Robert. So now you're psychoanalyzing me? No, Robert replied. I'm observing what everyone else in this room can see. The tension was palpable. For the first time since the interview began, Joy seemed to struggle for a response. Robert took a breath and continued. You know what the saddest part is? Joy didn't answer. I actually respect difficult conversations. His voice softened. Some of the most important moments of my life came from people holding me accountable when I needed it. He pointed lightly at the table. But accountability and cruelty aren't the same thing. The audience broke into applause again. Robert waited for it to settle before continuing. Recovery isn't a marketing strategy. Growth isn't a publicity stunt. Becoming a better father, a better husband, a better human being isn't a performance. His voice carried through the studio. It's work. Joy stared back at him. And you think you've got everything figured out? No, Robert answered immediately. Not even close. The answer seemed to catch everyone by surprise. I make mistakes every day. The difference is that I try to learn from them. He paused. The question is whether you're willing to do the same. The words landed heavily. No one spoke. Not the hosts. Not the audience. Not even Joy. For several seconds, the only sound in the studio was the hum of the equipment overhead. Then Robert leaned back in his chair and offered a small smile. I came here to talk about a movie. The audience laughed nervously, and somehow we ended up having a conversation about respect. He glanced around the table. Honestly, I think that's probably more important. A wave of applause rolled through the studio as the tension finally began to ease, leaving everyone aware that the interview had become something very different from what anyone had expected. Robert turned to face Joy directly, his eyes flashing with an intensity that seemed to command the entire room. Privileged? Joy, you want to talk about privilege? He gestured toward the studio around them. Let's talk about the privilege of having a national platform and using it to attack people under the banner of accountability. His voice remained steady, but every word landed with force. Let's talk about the privilege of sitting behind that desk and deciding that someone else's worst moments are fair game for entertainment. Joy shook her head. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? Robert shot back. Because from where I'm standing, this stopped being an interview a long time ago. The audience sat in complete silence. This isn't about my work. It isn't about my movie. It isn't even about my recovery anymore. He pointed toward the table. This is about proving a point. It's about creating conflict, because conflict gets attention. Joy's expression tightened. You think you're the victim here? No, Robert replied immediately. I think I'm the guest. The simplicity of the answer seemed to hit harder than any insult. I came here expecting a conversation. You came here looking for a confrontation. Joy folded her arms. You still haven't answered the real questions. Robert let out a slow breath. That's the thing, Joy, you keep saying that. He took a step closer. But every time I answer, you ignore the answer and move on to another accusation. The room remained motionless. You asked about my past. I answered. You questioned my recovery. I answered. You questioned my character. I answered. You questioned my motives. I answered. He spread his hands. What exactly are you looking for? Joy hesitated. For the first time all afternoon, she didn't have an immediate response. Robert continued. It feels like you've already decided who I am. And once you've done that, no answer is ever going to be good enough. Joy's voice rose again. Maybe that's because you're avoiding accountability. Robert laughed softly. Accountability? He nodded. Accountability is admitting when you're wrong. I've done that. Publicly. Repeatedly. For years. His expression hardened. But what about you? The question lingered in the air. What about your accountability? Joy stared at him. What is that supposed to mean? It means you've spent this entire interview judging me. Robert's voice was calm again. Have you spent even 1 second examining your own behavior? The audience remained completely silent. You've accused me of performing. You've questioned my sincerity. You've dismissed my experiences. And every time someone pushes back, you call it being defensive. He shook his head. That's not accountability. That's a double standard. Joy's face flushed. You don't get to come on my show and lecture me. Your show? Robert replied. I thought this was a conversation. A nervous ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Joy looked furious. Robert wasn't finished. You know what really bothers me? His voice softened. Not the criticism, not the questions, not even the personal attacks. He paused. What bothers me is the message. Joy frowned. What message? The message that people can't change. The studio grew even quieter, because that's what this whole conversation has been about. You keep dragging me back to the worst chapter of my life, as if nothing that happened afterward matters, as if growth doesn't matter, as if redemption doesn't matter. He shook his head slowly. If that's true, then what's the point of anyone trying to become better? Nobody answered. Robert looked around the studio. I've spent years trying to prove that people can recover, that mistakes don't have to define you forever, that failure doesn't have to be the end of the story. His eyes returned to Joy. And the sad thing is, I think a lot of people watching at home understand that better than you do. The audience erupted into applause. Joy looked visibly shaken. That's enough, she said, her voice trembling with frustration. No, Robert replied. What's enough is pretending this is journalism when it's really just hostility. The applause grew louder. Robert waited for it to settle. Then he spoke one final time. You wanted to know who the real Robert Downey Jr. is. His voice was measured and calm. The real Robert Downey Jr. is someone who made mistakes, admitted them, learned from them, and kept moving forward. He glanced around the studio. And if that's not enough for some people, I can live with that. A long silence followed. No one at the table seemed to know what to say next. For the first time since the interview began, the spotlight wasn't on Robert at all. It was on everyone watching, left to decide for themselves what they had just witnessed. Joy, I've spent years learning to recognize toxic behavior, and right now you're exhibiting every warning sign. The accusation landed with stunning force. Joy's expression shifted rapidly between anger, disbelief, and frustration. You don't know anything about me, she shot back, struggling to maintain control. I know what I'm seeing right now, Robert replied calmly. I'm seeing someone so determined to create a headline that she's willing to sacrifice both her integrity and her guest dignity to get it. The studio remained silent. I'm seeing someone who's forgotten that the people sitting across from her are human beings, not props in a performance. Joy straightened in her chair. I treat everyone the same way. I ask everyone tough questions. No, you don't, Robert answered immediately. I've watched this show. He paused. I've seen you treat some guests with warmth and respect. I've seen you challenge others aggressively. This isn't about asking difficult questions. His gaze never left hers. This is about deciding who deserves fairness and who doesn't. Joy crossed her arms. I don't owe you an explanation for how I conduct interviews. Robert nodded. You're right. You don't owe me one. Then his expression hardened. But you do owe your audience one. The room seemed to freeze. You owe them an explanation for why someone gets invited here to discuss their work and ends up defending their character instead. You owe them an explanation for why personal attacks are being presented as accountability. Sarah attempted to redirect the conversation. Maybe we can talk about Robert's new project. But Joy interrupted. Fine, you want to know why? She leaned forward. Because I'm tired of celebrities thinking they can control the narrative. Her voice grew sharper. I'm tired of actors coming onto television expecting easy questions while making millions portraying heroes they could never be in real life. The statement lingered in the air. Robert slowly nodded. There it is. The audience sat motionless. The truth. His voice was almost gentle now. This was never about journalism. It was never about accountability. It wasn't even about my movie. He shook his head. This was about resentment. Joy immediately protested. That's not true. Isn't it? Robert asked. Every question you've asked has assumed the worst possible interpretation. Every answer I've given has been dismissed. You've taken my mistakes, my recovery, my family, and my life and treated them like evidence in a case you've already decided. He spread his hands. If that's not resentment, what is it? It's accountability, Joy repeated. But even she seemed less certain. Robert sighed. No, Joy. Accountability means asking questions and listening to answers. Accountability means examining facts. Accountability means being willing to change your opinion if the evidence changes. He paused. What you've done today is try to humiliate someone because you think it makes compelling television. A long silence followed. And the saddest part? Robert continued. It probably will. People will watch it. They'll argue about it. They'll share clips online. And somewhere along the way, that will get mistaken for success. Joy said nothing. Robert turned slightly toward the audience. I hope people take something different away from this. His voice carried throughout the studio. I hope they learn the difference between criticism and cruelty. I hope they learn that accountability doesn't require humiliation. And I hope they remember that every person, whether they're famous or not, deserves basic human dignity. He stood up. The movement immediately changed the energy in the room. Joy, I came here to talk about a project I'm proud of. I came here to connect with people who have supported my work. Instead, I've spent this conversation defending my sobriety, my family, and my character. He shook his head. None of those things had anything to do with why I was invited here. That's not journalism. That's not accountability. And it's certainly not a conversation. Joy made one final attempt to stop him. You can't just walk away because you don't like the questions. Robert paused. Then he looked back at her. Joy, these weren't questions. They were accusations. And yes, I can walk away from accusations. His voice softened. One of the most important lessons recovery taught me is that I don't have to stay in situations that are unhealthy. I don't have to accept disrespect simply because it's coming from someone with a microphone. He turned toward the camera. To everyone watching, thank you for believing that people can grow. Thank you for believing in second chances. And thank you for understanding that a person's worst moment doesn't have to define the rest of their life. The audience remained completely silent. Robert reached for his microphone. Joy shook her head. This proves exactly what I was saying. You can't handle scrutiny, so you leave. Robert stopped. He turned back one final time. Joy, if you think what happened here today was scrutiny, then you don't understand what scrutiny means. His voice was calm and measured. Scrutiny is examining facts. Scrutiny is asking honest questions. Scrutiny is seeking truth. What happened here today wasn't scrutiny. It was hostility. And there's a difference. With that, the studio fell silent, once again as every eye remained fixed on the confrontation that had gone far beyond anything anyone expected when the interview began.